Wealth is not to feed our egos, but to feed those that are hungry and to help people help themselves. This famous quote by Andrew Carnegie might seem like an odd statement from someone who was once the richest man in the world, yet it was a philosophy that Andrew Carnegie lived by. As college students, we might think that our primary concern is getting an education that will secure us some measure of wealth, or at the very least, financial freedom. But David Nasaw wrote in his book, Andrew Carnegie, that the richest man in the world had very little formal education, yet he managed to amass great wealth. Carnegie believed that being poor was a virtue, and that poverty at the beginning of one's life was a positive blessing. Today, we're going to take a look at the history of Andrew Carnegie's rise to riches. We'll talk about his role in the iron industry in the United States, and we'll examine the ideology behind his gospel of wealth. Let's start by looking at Carnegie's early years. According to an article by David Simonelli entitled Wealth, Andrew Carnegie was born in 1835 to poor Scottish parents. His father was a failed linen weaver, which left the responsibility for putting food on the table to his mother, who worked as a shopkeeper and took orders as a shoemaker in order to earn a living. In 1848, Carnegie and his family set sail for America, where, according to an article by Funk and Wagnall's New World Encyclopedia, Carnegie accepted several odd jobs, finally landing at the Pennsylvania Railroad, where he advanced through the ranks to become superintendent. Of course, this was just the beginning of Andrew Carnegie's venture into the iron industry. Next, let's look at how he amassed his great wealth. David Nasaw wrote that in his book, Andrew Carnegie, that despite his lack of education, Carnegie made the brave choice to leave the Pennsylvania Railroad and go into business for himself. Alongside him were two of his former employers, Tom Scott and J. Edgar Thompson. Together, these three men set up several companies whose job it was to supply the Pennsylvania Railroad with the raw materials needed to build iron bridges. The Funk and Wagnall article goes on to say that Andrew Carnegie later founded a steel mill, and that he was one of the earliest users of the Bessemer process for making steel. This led to him having controlling interest in several large steel mills. By 1899, he controlled 25% of American iron and steel production. But by 1901, he had enough of business and industry and decided to sell his company to the United States Steel Corporation for a whopping $250 million. This led to retirement as one of the richest men in the world. But retirement wasn't the end of Carnegie's story. His love for philanthropy led to an ideology which he later called his gospel of wealth. Carnegie felt that the wealthy were morally obligated to give back some of their riches to others in society. And so, giving away his fortune became his new occupation. In an article entitled Andrew Carnegie Philanthropist, published by the Library of Congress, cites Andrew Carnegie as the founder of the Carnegie Institution to fund scientific research and to establish a pension fund for teachers. Carnegie loved to read, and so it was no surprise that he wanted to support education. By 1911, he had given away 90% of his fortune. But David Nasaw wrote in his book that Carnegie knew, despite his generosity, he would not be able to dispose of his wealth in his lifetime. And so he rewrote his will and set aside the remainder of his estate in his trust, which led to the foundation of the Carnegie Corporation of New York, the largest philanthropic trust in history. Today, we've studied the history behind Carnegie's rise to riches. We've looked at his role in the iron industry, and we've talked a little about his ideology behind his gospel of wealth. By examining the life and philanthropy of one of the richest men in the U.S., I hope that we as college students understand we should be concerned with more than just garnering an education in order that we can establish wealth or financial freedom. We should desire to serve others. I'd like to leave you with one final quote from Andrew Carnegie himself, and that is, "The man who dies thus rich dies disgraced. Rather than living to amass riches, we should desire to live richly." Thank you for watching.